Hi friends, I welcome you all here at TNV Academy. In this session, we are going to talk about an international standard ISO IEC 17021-1. Now, let us discuss the clause 4, principles of the standard. Coming to the subclause 4.1, general of the standard. The subclause 4.1.1 of ISO 17021-1 states that the principles described in this subclause provide the basis for the subsequent specific performance and descriptive requirements in this part 1 of ISO 17021-1 2015. This part of ISO 17021-1 does not give exact requirements for all circumstances that can happen. These principles should be applied as guidance for the decisions that may need to be made for unexpected situations. As per this subclause 4.1.1, principles are not requirements. Coming to the subclause 4.1.2 now. The subclause 4.1.2 specifies that the overall aim of certification is to provide confidence to all parties that a management system fulfills specified requirements. As per this subclause, the worth of certification is the amount of public confidence and trust that is established by an impartial and proficient assessment by a third party. Subclause 4.1.2 says that parties who have an interest in certification are required to include but are not limited to the clients of the certification bodies, the customers of the organizations whose management systems are certified, governmental authorities, non-governmental organizations, and consumers and other members of the public. Let us talk about the subclause 4.1.3. The subclause 4.1.3 states that principles for inspiring confidence include impartiality, competence, responsibility, openness, confidentiality, responsiveness to complaints, and risk-based approach. The subclause suggests and states under a note that this part 1 of ISO IEC 17021-1 sets out the principles of certification in clause 4 of the standard. The corresponding principles related to auditing can be found in clause 4 of ISO 19011-2011. Let's come to the clause 4.2, impartiality. The subclause 4.2.1 states that it is necessary for a certification body being impartial and being perceived to be impartial to deliver certification providing confidence. Subclause says that it is important that all internal and external personnel are aware of the need for impartiality. Now, the subclause 4.2.2 states that it is known that the source of income for a certification body is its client, who is actually paying for the certification, and this is a potential threat to impartiality as well. Coming to subclause 4.2.3, this subclause 4.2.3 specifies that to obtain and maintain confidence, it is essential that the decisions of a certification body must be based on objective evidence of conformity or non-conformity obtained by them. It is also essential to ensure that the decisions are not influenced by other interests of certification body or by other parties. Let me talk about the subclause 4.2.4 now. As per this subclause, threats to impartiality may include but are not limited to self-interest. These are threats that arise from a person or body acting in their own interest. A concern related to certification as a threat to impartiality is financial self-interest. Self-review. The threats that arise from a person or body reviewing the work done by themselves. Auditing the management systems of a client to whom the certification body provided management systems consultancy would be a self-review threat. Familiarity. or trust. These are threats that arise from a person or body being too familiar with or trusting of another person instead of seeking audit evidence. Intimidation. The threats that arise from a person or body having a perception of being coerced openly or secretively, such as a threat to be replaced or reported to a supervisor. Let us understand the clause 4.3, competence of the standard. The subclause 4.3.1 says that the competence of the personnel of the certification body who is involved in all the functions of certification activities is necessary to deliver a certification that provides confidence. Now, coming to the subclause 4.3.2, this clause simply states that the competence of the personnel also needs to be supported by the management system of the certification body. The subclause 4.3.3 says that it is a key issue for the management of the certification body to have an implemented process for the establishment of competence criteria for the personnel involved in the audit and other certification activities, and to perform evaluation against the criteria. Let us now discuss the clause 4.4, responsibility of ISO 17021-1 2015. The subclause 4.4.1 of ISO 17021-1 specifies that the certified client has the responsibility for consistently achieving the intended results of implementation of the management system, standard, and conformity with the requirements for certification. The certification body is not responsible for it. Coming to subclause 4.4.2. This subclause 4.4.2 states that it is the responsibility of the certification body to assess sufficient objective evidence upon which to base a certification decision. Based on audit conclusions, if there is sufficient evidence of conformity, certification body makes a decision to grant certification or not to grant certification if there is not sufficient evidence of conformity. Subclause 4.4.2 states under a note that any audit is based on sampling within an organization's management system and therefore is not a guarantee of 100% conformity with requirements. Friends, let's understand the clause 4.5, openness. Let me start with subclause 4.5.1. This subclause 4.5.1 specifies that a certification body needs to provide public access and disclosure of appropriate and timely information about its audit process, certification process, and the certification status, that is, the granting, maintaining of certification, expanding or reducing the scope of certification, renewing, suspending or restoring or withdrawing of certification of any organization. It is required in an order to gain confidence in the integrity and credibility of certification. As per this subclause, openness is a principle of access to appropriate information or disclosure of appropriate information. Coming to the subclause 4.5.2, according to this subclause, 4.5.2 of the ISO 17021-1 to gain or maintain confidence in certification. A certification body should provide appropriate access to or disclosure of non-confidential information about the conclusions of specific audits to specific interested parties. Let us talk about the subclause 4.6, confidentiality. This clause says that a certification body is required not to disclose any confidential information to gain the privileged access to information that is needed for the certification body to assess conformity to requirements for certification adequately. Coming now to the clause 4.7, responsiveness to complaints. This clause says that parties that rely on certification expect to have complaints investigated. If any complaints are found to be valid, they should have confidence that these complaints will be appropriately addressed and that a reasonable effort will be made by the certification body to resolve them. As per this clause, effective responsiveness to complaints is an important means of protection for the certification body, for its clients, and other users of certification against errors, omissions, or unreasonable behavior. It safeguards the confidence in certification activities when complaints are processed appropriately. Subclause 4.7 says under a note that in order to demonstrate integrity and credibility to all users of certification, an appropriate balance between the principles of openness and confidentiality, including responsiveness to complaints, must be developed. Coming now to the clause 4.8, risk-based approach of ISO 17021-1. This subclause 4.8 states that the certification bodies need to take into account the risks associated with providing competent, consistent, and impartial certification. As per this subclause, risks may include but are not limited to those associated with the objectives of the audit, the sampling used in the audit process, real and perceived impartiality, legal, regulatory, and liability issues, the client organization being audited and its operating environment, impact of the audit on the client and its activities, health and safety of the audit teams, perception of interested parties, misleading statements by the certified client, and use of marks. Friends, we have completed the clause 4 of ISO 17021-1 2015. I sincerely thank you for your interest and attention. Thanks and best wishes.